Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome, guys. Follow up from the last video that I made. Okay, we are going to be talking and discussing what are God's actions. How can we understand God's actions? Okay, so those are some of the things we'll be discussing, and we'll talk about time. We'll talk about even space and all of that. So, how should I start this? So we are going to discuss God's actions, and you see between the Asharis and the Salafis, they are disagreeing with themselves. So I want to go to the root of the issue. Remember in that video, I claimed that the root problem is this. Okay. I told you guys in that video that whatever stance you take on this issue of spatial temporality is going to affect your Akida. Okay. So this actually determines whatever Akida stance you're going to take. If you believe God is spatial temporal, meaning space and time, or let's say dimension, or size, okay, and time, or temporality. Okay, so if you believe space and time applies to God, that's the Salafi position. Okay, and if you don't believe space and time applies to God, that's the Ashari position. So now, in Boraj's video and many Salafis, they have a problem conceiving how we can even deny this. So their position, sometimes they even call anyone that denies space or dimension absolutely that you're an atheist. They will say, if you say there's no direction, it's usually in the topic of direction that they bring this up. To them, if something does not have a size, okay, if something does not have a size, it does not exist. Okay, think about it to yourself. Imagine we have a cube like this. It has a size, okay, so you can fit this thing inside it. Okay, it has a size, but imagine this size gets smaller and smaller until there's nothing left. So literally they are correct. But does that apply to God and other things that are beyond the realm of this world? Do we have to stretch this material concept to things beyond the experience that we've had up to the level of God? Do we have to do that? So this is the problem with their position, and I'm going to show you. So this one is on the issue of space, but we want to talk about the issue of time. Okay, this is the one that is important. So this is a very difficult issue. Even scientists, till today, scientists are like coming out as if they know what they're talking about. They don't actually understand time. There are different views on time, especially in relation to the beginning of the universe. So when you say beginning, or when you say something began, like there are many things associated with this. When you say something began, I'm going to show you. Don't worry. I'll explain it to you what is going on here. So let's imagine a material object again. Let's say this cube. This cube, it has a size, right? We've already established that it has a size. Okay. Now it's also temporal. It has a temporal location. So it has a spatial location and it has a temporal location. Let's use this to show the temporal location. So this is, let's say T1. Okay, is located in this spatial temporal. So now this, imagine you have this same thing. It persists. Okay, it endures. And then you have another one. And then you have another one like that. So let's say this is T2. This is T3. Okay, and TX. So the point is that look at this thing. Is enduring through time. Through time, even without doing anything, is in this T1, this T2, and so on and so forth. So there are different views on time. Some people think time is an entity. Some people think time is just the relation between T1 and T2. So change. So if something changes, then time exists. If it doesn't change, then there's no time. So that's one of the views that some people have, that time exists only if there's change. Okay, now how does this relate to God's actions? I want to show you something first before we get to that. I started with T1. Now this T1, is there anything before T1? See, if there's something before T1, then there will be something before that, and then you go to is infinite to the past, which is the Salafi position, right? That the past is infinite. So one of the views on time is that infinite past, okay? And then the second view is finite past, okay? And then the last one I think is the cyclic one, cyclic view, okay? So the cyclic view is that it goes to the end and then it goes back again. It's like going in circle. The infinite past one is like this, the finite past one is like this, okay? So these are three views on this issue of time. Now, which one is the correct position, and how do we even understand this? So this will be the Ashari position, this is the Ashari position, this is the Salafi position, okay? Infinite past, finite past. Now, I feel like at the end of the day, you cannot convince people to leave the Aqidah they believe in. Like, if somebody is really a materialist, or is really not going to let that a conception go, you cannot, there's nothing you can do, because he will not believe that something can exist and it doesn't have a size. He will not believe that. So for me, I like to think about these Aqidah issues more of a choice. You weigh the both positions and you see which one actually is the one you can swallow, the one that is somewhat much more coherent or consistent, or it doesn't have a lot of problems. That's how I look at it, because every position you take, it has a lot of problems. Any position you take, there will be some people that will object to it with arguments, and they will present the arguments, and this is how life is. But at the end of the day, you have to make your decision. So now, let me now present to you some of the problems that is going on. The problem with let's start with the Ashari position. The problem with the finite past thing is that those people that believe in finite past, they use the concept of infinite regress. So they say, if there's a moment of now, if there's a now, there cannot be an infinite past, because how can we get to now if the past is infinite? Which is a good argument. How can you get to now if the past is infinite? So they say the past cannot be infinite, it has to be finite. It had to have began. So they use that it began. Now, if the past is not infinite and it began, what was before that? So for instance, because they are theists, of course, they will say God created the world, God existed before creating the world, or they use the term before. Okay, so this is the problem they have. They use the term before to describe something that is what's it called? If the past is finite, that means there's a beginning point. There cannot be anything before it. Like, if you say something is before it, is also, it will start another series that will go back infinitely. So there cannot be something before it. But I know, of course, they don't mean before in a temporal sense. This is where they're not coming, and this is my own position too, by the way. They don't mean before in a temporal sense. So they can say before, after. They can even use that term, before and after. But there's before and after that is here. The before and after that is beyond this side is not temporal. Okay? The before and after this one is not temporal. Okay? And they say God exists beyond this before and after thing. So how can God act if there's no before and after? Let's go back to where we started from. Remember, T2 is before T3, and this is what can change. This is what accounts for the change. So how can you act if you are not changing? So according to what most people will say is that you cannot do any action if you are not changing from one state to another, or from one temporal location to another temporal location. Okay, so let's even talk about change. Okay, so change from one temporal location to another temporal location, from one state to another state. So some people will posit that this is what accounts for an action. An action is possible only if you go from one temporal state to another temporal state. If this is not possible, how can you do any action? And if you don't go from one state to another state, so they will say this state S1 is that You didn't create yet. So S1 is before you created. S2 is after you created. So this is the only way you can account for action. So an action is possible if there's time. So this state too, is it already sounding temporal to you? From one state to another state. There was a state before, and then something changed, and then there's another state after. So it sounds temporal. It is temporal. So how do you answer this? Now I'll give you the answer that we give, that I think is there. And so you say that there are objections that people can make to this. Don't act as if they cannot object to it. They can. And you need to know how to answer it. Me, I have a way I'll answer it later, but let's not talk about. So this is, you have seen the Asharis position. You have seen like, look at this. Now let's go back to the case of the infinite past. So in the case of the infinite past, we'll now discuss the problems with this one too, so that you see like which one can you actually swallow between the two. So in the case of the infinite past, is that the first objection right off the bat is that how can you have a now if the past is infinite? That's a very good argument. There's no way you can explain it. How can you have now if the past is infinite? There's no way you can explain it. Unless you believe in some kind of infinite block. Even that one, you cannot answer this question. By the way, this is Imam al-Ghazali's and many Ashari arguments to show that the world is created and there's a beginning to the world. Now, other problems with the infinite past is that, so this is the first one. The second problem is that the atheists love this type of conception of an infinite past. They love it because what an infinite past means is that there is no beginning to anything. You cannot say something began. Remember, we say something began here. For the case of the infinite past, there's no beginning point to the world. The world is eternal into the past and into the future. It doesn't make sense to say when did it begin. There's no beginning. And if there's no beginning, okay, if there's no beginning, what's the problem? Why do they don't need God to create the world? The Ashari position forces them to acknowledge that the world was created by somebody. But this position, if you give them this, there's no need for them to believe in God, that God created the world. The world has always been in the past and it will always be in the future. Do you see? That's another problem. Another problem now is that Muslims believe in the idea of the first creation, that there was something called the first creation. Okay? If you believe in the first creation, that there was something that was the first creation, then there cannot be an infinite past for the world. Okay? So the world cannot go back infinitely because there was actually a first creation. Literally, a first creation that began. So there's this first creation that began. Literally. So this is problematic for your position if you believe the past is infinite. Okay? And so I think there are many other problems I could have cited, but you can see why the infinite past position is also problematic. So both of them are problematic. Which one do you think you can swallow? For instance, now, is this not a textual proof against the idea of infinite past, that there was actually a first creation? Someone could make that argument. So you see, now let's now go back to how the Ashari can answer the question. So okay, let's see how I can do this. So this is the solution. Come with the solution. Okay, this is my own way of solving the issue, in my own opinion. This is the first thing. The first thing you need to acknowledge is that no matter which solution you give, people will not be satisfied with it. They will not find it compelling. But me, I want there. See, there's something I want. There are some things I want. I want creation to begin, because I'm not an atheist. Creation must begin. It must begin because God created it. It cannot go back infinitely. I cannot give the atheists that argument to use, because the moment I affirm its possibility, I've given them arguments to use against me. So the creation must begin. That's the first one. And because they're contingent, we can even make many arguments. By the way, I'm not even going to get into that. So there are some things I want to achieve with this. And I want to affirm the idea of a first creation. Okay, first creation is Okay, first creation. The creation, God created it. It didn't exist before. There was the first one, and then others came after. So that just breaks down the idea of an infinite past. So now, how can I account for God's action? This is the point of the video, right? But I know I have to discuss many issues. That's why I'm going into all over the place. But the action thing, remember, let's go back to the action idea. T1, T2, S1, S2. So this is what they say that is necessary for any action. So if you say God created the world, if it's an act, then it must be temporal. This is logic, man. It must be temporal. It must be like God before he didn't create and then he created. If not, the creation will be eternal. Like, it makes sense. But this is the problem. This only makes sense if there's a big condition. This only works if God is temporal. Okay? If God, in his own essence, is also changing. This only makes sense if this is the case. If God is not temporal, then this cannot apply to God. Okay? So, now, if you say God is temporal himself, not just the world, the same kind of arguments that we propose, first of all, it will mean that God had a beginning. There are many proofs for this. You can go, Asharis have abundant proofs for this kind of thing. If you say God is temporal, that it changes, then if there's a moment of now, they will just add it to that series and they'll be like, God must have a beginning. And we cannot believe that God had the beginning, therefore God cannot be temporal. There are many arguments. So now, how can I account for an action if I'm saying that God is atemporal? Okay, God is not temporal. So to account for an action, first of all, you see that this state, from one state to another state, it has a temporal connotation in it already. It's not innocent temporally. So the T1 and T2 and S1 and S2 is just the same thing. There's no point in saying, there's no difference between something changing from one state to another if you are not thinking temporally. Now here comes the bullet. So this is the bullet. Okay, our mind and reason is spatio-temporal. This is the answer. Kant, someone like Kant and many other people. The point is that we are forgetting something here. Who is making all these judgments? Who is doing all this thinking? The human being. And the human being, his mind is spatio-temporal. Therefore, he is not fit to discuss this issue. So I'm removing you. So when you get to this level and you want to talk about God's actions, you're not fit for the discussion. I'm sorry, you're not. You know why? It's not your fault. All your experience that you've seen, all the things you've seen in your life, all the things you have interacted with, your knowledge base is what? Is spatio-temporal. Is spatio-temporal. Is true. You perceive things. Even you yourself, you're spatio-temporal. You have a size and you're changing through time. And you're observing things that have a size and changing through time. It's not your fault that you're thinking that everything must be spatio-temporal because that's what you know. But what if there's something beyond human knowledge? Okay? Beyond, greater than human knowledge. Imam al-Ghazali's third way. Remember that video I made about Imam al-Ghazali's third way? So when it gets to the level of God, God is not a human being. So if God is not a human being, why would we apply spatio-temporality to God? If God is not like the creatures we've observed, why would we apply spatio-temporality to God? This is why you cannot do this. You can affirm the truth that God created the world, that the world didn't exist eternally. But to now say that God has to be temporal for that to happen, you are using your human experience of all the beings, all the creatures we observed, human being and all the creatures, they cannot act except T1, T2, and all those things. But God, and this is the problem, when we are using the same term act, we're using the same term act. So we don't need, we think that it means the same thing when it applies to God and when it applies to creatures. Because God is not a human being, it doesn't mean the same thing. What we need to affirm is that we are created by God. And God is our creator. how he did it, what kind of action we'll call that. We can call it action because that's our language, but it doesn't mean it's temporal. So the moment you can acknowledge that something is beyond human knowledge, and yet it is true, something is beyond your conception, and yet it is true, you cannot then sneak in spatial temporality into it, because that's what you're doing when you make temporality a necessity for an action. Yes, is you know what? Let me even. I want to wrap up the video. So action, and let me bring back the idea of before, after. This is important. Okay, I don't know if this is too long already. Now, an action. Definition of an action is temporal. T1, T2. Therefore, we should find another term instead of using action for God. Okay, but we use it for convenience. We use it because this is our language, and we cannot even think beyond spatial temporality. But we affirm that God created the world somehow without it being temporal, because everything we know is temporal. That's what I'm telling you here. So embedded in the definition of an action is temporality, because that's human knowledge. But if something is beyond that, we can still call it an action, but it doesn't mean it's really an action of T1 to T2. So if you're a materialist or an empiricist that will not acknowledge of something beyond human knowledge, and it's still true, then you will not accept this. But we accept it. Okay. Now, also the same problem with before and after. The concept of before and after is gotten from human knowledge of before and after of temporality. Him is changing through time. Other creatures are changing through time. So he got his idea of before and after from there. So if you say God did something, Kabbalah, when you say Kabbalah, okay, what does the spelling say? Kabbalah, okay, I get why you're saying Kabbalah. Before, you're using it in that term of our language, but it doesn't mean it is temporal, because if it is temporal, then you don't believe God is atemporal. So you cannot, when you say Kabbalah, when you say before, you need to understand that it means something else. It means something beyond. So instead of saying before, God created before, you should say, I prefer the term beyond. So God is beyond time. God is not before. So some people say, okay, God created time. Created time. Okay, some people say this. Whether time is an entity or not, it doesn't matter. The thing is that if you say this, they will say, God, how can God create time? That means God existed before time. So if God existed before time, that means there's before and after relation between God and what after he created. So God is temporal. You see, it's because you're using that term before. You need to understand that before doesn't mean really before. It is something beyond. We use it because that's the limit of our knowledge, but we are not materialists and we are not empiricists. We believe in something beyond human knowledge and beyond human experience, and it's still true and exists, and therefore we can affirm it without needing to believe God being temporal and infinite to the past and many other problems that come with it. What do you guys think about this video? Has it helped you understand time? What are the objections that you have that I can make in another video? Whatever, your comments, put it in the comment section, and see you guys later. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.